Open the Government organization. Executive Director Lisa Rosenberg joins us in studio. Hi, Lisa. Good to see you.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Well, how does that's a basic principle, right? That we ought to know at whatever level, city council, school board, state legislature, United States Congress, or the White House, we ought to know, and the agencies, what our government is up to.
Absolutely. And that's the premise of Open the Government. Our organization is a coalition of 100 other organizations that believe in exactly what you said, the right to know what our government is doing, the fact that our democracy is stronger if we're open and transparent, and that our government will be more accountable with transparency.
It's so funny because,
it's pretty basic.
Yeah, it is a basic thing. But, when Barack Obama was running, he was like, we're going to have the most transparent government in the history of America.
Didn't happen.
Which didn't exactly happen.
No,
but, that was a thing that they were running on.
Right. Yeah. No, it's something we should all believe in, and it's something our coalition members who are left, right, and center and cover all different issue areas. We have environmental groups, we have library associations, we have national security organizations. So we have a lot of groups that do come together with this, as you said, this very basic principle, but it's still an uphill battle.
And it should not be a partisan. For some reason, I'm on some mailing lists. I don't know who people think I am. Like, I'm on Roy Moore's email list, okay? Jesus, I get them every day, but it kind of gives me an insight into the lies that he's telling.
It's important to know what's going on. Right?
But I'm also on the email list for this organization, Judicial Watch, and that crazy nut Larry Klayman, right, who used to be a guest on Crossfire back in those days. But the only thing that I ever agree with them on is when they get on a rant about having some documents released.
That's exactly right. And Judicial Watch is actually really good on getting documents. So that's where we find the commonality with a lot of our partners is, where does the information come from when we all need that information about our government?
Is it too early to know how the Trump administration stacks up when it comes to transparency, open government?
Well, I think there are signs, as you mentioned.
Signs good or bad?
Oh, signs bad. Yeah, definitely signs bad. As you mentioned, the Obama administration sort of, campaigned on being the most transparent. And it wasn't always. There's no question about that. They had their shortcomings. I like to say that the Obama administration maybe closed the curtain a little bit on transparent government, but the Trump administration seems to be hammering up boards, over that window and really just shutting it down. And we saw it before Trump even took office, right? The fact that he would not release his tax returns is sort of an obvious transparency issue that leads to so many others. But he shut down the release of the visitors' logs to the White House. He has, just fought a free press. He's totally opposed and doesn't seem to understand the importance of a free press. So that's really, really dangerous in terms of openness and transparency and accountability. We have problems with that. His cabinet officials, too, are very secretive. So we've heard that Scott Pruitt at the EPA is actually building a telephone booth inside the EPA so that his phone calls can't be heard by anyone.
God.
Right. This is not a transparent government. Rex Tillerson, too, he said he doesn't like the press. He's not a media guy. He doesn't want the press traveling with him. So all of these are signs that that we've got a real transparency problem. And again, with my coalition, what's really exciting is the fact that we do have left, right, and center coming together to recognize that this is a problem.
Isn't there sort of maybe unfairly, though, the impression that if they want to hide it, they're doing something wrong?
There is that impression. And I think a lot of folks they hear the word transparency and they recoil. They say, oh, what are you hiding? You're not really as transparent as you say as you say you're being. So, I think that is something that we have to address as a community. We have to link transparency to accountability. We have to show that there's results. If there's transparency, if there's a problem, what are the consequences? What if we've uncovered an issue? How are we going to resolve that issue?
I should know this, given I've been active in the media for so long. But I must admit that I don't. So we do have the Freedom of Information Act, right? How recent is that?
So there were amendments to the Freedom of Information Act that were just actually enacted a couple of years ago. So very, very soon. And it was strengthened. We like to say the Freedom of Information Act gets a refresh maybe every 10 years.
Yeah.
So,
and what does it cover?
So it covers executive branch agencies. It doesn't cover Congress, which is a problem.
Yeah.
But the executive branch, is required when you submit a Freedom of Information request to respond one way or another. And unfortunately, often those responses are, no, we can't give you that information, or, yeah, here's the information, but a lot of it's blacked out and redacted. So there's an appeals process, and a lot of times folks in our community especially have to take advantage of that appeals process and really push and continue to push and even, often take it to court before they get the information that they need.
No, it is funny because the phrase, I'm going to FOIA, we're going to FOIA that, right, has become part of the English language, but it's such an inside the beltway phrase.
I hope I didn't say that. Did
no,
I
you
say
didn't,
that? Okay.
No, and every time I hear it, I always sort of laugh and say, how many people... I hear people say it on television or radio. How many people
We need to FOIA
understand
that. We need to FOIA that.
What the hell they're talking about. But, for example, I just learned from you that it doesn't apply to Congress.
Right.
Why shouldn't it apply to Congress?
It should, but Congress makes the rules, and they don't want it to apply to them. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
So they apply to all the other federal agencies and departments,
right?
Which is good, which is great.
It is, yeah.
And gives you a lot of, area there in which you can be active, but that's a lot that Congress does too, and particularly cobbling together these bills. Or, let's take a good example: the Ethics Committee.
Right.
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 The information that they may have on a sexual predator in Congress.
I mean, the Ethics Committee is pretty confidential. But I think what we've just discovered recently that is even more troubling, there's something to be said for confidential investigations, right? You don't necessarily want to point the finger at somebody until you have the evidence. But what we've found out now is with these sexual harassment suits that are happening in Congress, there's a secret slush fund that is paying off accusers to keep their mouths shut. That's taxpayer money. That's not accountable government. If my money is being used to pay off a claim or a settlement, I think that's a real problem, and I'd really like to see transparency around those payments.
Full disclosure, I had no idea that was a thing.
No, nobody did.
Yeah,
nobody did.
I mean, what in
until
the
John
hell?
Conyers.
Right.
John Conyers, then Blake Farenthold.
Right, exactly.
And, I mean, how many of these things have been used?
We don't know. I mean, and that's the problem.
My God.
We didn't know. I mean, those of us in the openness community didn't know that this was actually happening. It's a problem. And there's actually a couple different potential slush funds. There's sort of this one that was designed to pay off accusers kind of institution-wide for all of Congress. But members of Congress can also use their personal allotments, the money that they get to run their offices, to also pay off. But again, that's
which is also taxpayer money.
It's also taxpayer money.
All taxpayer money. So, I think we need to address that. And, there's got to be a way. There's a bill in Congress right now that hopefully would shine a light on some of those settlements. So we're really interested to see where that's going to go.
Lisa Rosenberg is the executive director of Open the Government. The website is openthegovernment.org, correct? Right?
Correct,
openthegovernment.org.
Right.
Check it out for all the other issues that they're involved in, some of which we'll get to here, but we won't be able to exhaust the arena of their good work. So check out openthegovernment.org, right? Yeah.
.org.
So
yes.
what's in terms of secrecy, openness, what's the greatest challenge today that or two or three that you're working on?
Well, I mean, we already touched on
the
Trump administration and just the patterns in the future, because he's setting examples of more and more secrecy. So I think that as a community, we're going to have to pay attention to that, defend against that, and then hopefully, when the time is right, push back against that and actually affirmatively create more openness so that, for example, Congress candidates have to release their tax returns. We could legislate that very easily. So it just takes the will of Congress to require that sort of thing to happen. Or White House visitors laws or that sort of thing. So,
White House visitors law, of course.
Really
we ought to know who's coming in
and there are things
out of
that we can fix. I think in the short term, one of the things we're paying very close attention to right now this month is surveillance issues, and in particular the FBI and its ability to monitor communications, emails, telephone calls of Americans without a warrant. And we're very concerned about that, and we think that that's just something that we're going to have to address. There's a law that allows the National Security Administration to collect information about communications about from folks outside of the United States. So non-U.S. citizens living outside the United States, we can get their information for national security purposes, for their telephone calls, their emails, et cetera. But when those telephone calls and those emails happen to be with American citizens, that information is collected also.
Right. But isn't this is the old debate that started with George Bush, right? George W. Bush, with not getting the FISA warrant or claiming that he didn't need a FISA warrant, as easy as they are to get, right?
Well, yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And we are really concerned that the FBI then can do that, can go out without a warrant, pour through that database of U.S. people's communications, right? And use that in criminal cases.
But isn't NSA aren't they still collecting every...
They're still collecting a lot of information,
right? On whatever it's called, on every single phone call.
Yes, there's a lot of information being collected, and again, it's being collected ostensibly from foreign people. But when they talk to you or me, if you happen to be communicating with somebody outside the U.S., that information
aren't they also storing data on just domestic calls on every single call?
They shouldn't be.
Are the phone companies?
The phone companies might be. Right, and then they would need to go to the phone companies.
They'd have to go to the phone companies to get that data, right? I mean, wasn't that, as I recall,
so that was a big problem.
That was the step that they took to sort of, in essence, to protect us. But how difficult is it to get a FISA warrant?
Well, the problem we're looking at right now is the FBI doesn't have to get a FISA warrant. The problem is the FBI can search this data without a warrant at all. So what we're hoping is, there's again a simple fix, a simple bipartisan fix would be to require the FBI to get a warrant. Senators Paul and Senators Wyden have a bill that would do just that. In addition to the warrant, their bill would require some reporting by the FBI. How often do they use these databases? How effective is this information collection? Do they really catch bad guys when they pour through these databases? And the Wyden-Paul bill would have some reporting to Congress so that Congress would know if this is effective, if this is actually working. And that's the kind of accountability we're looking for.
How dangerous is the information to our national security? Is the information made public by Edward Snowden?
I mean, look, I would say that none of us in my community, I know this for a fact. We do not want national security information released if it's going to potentially harm us. We really, really want to be careful about that. And, we do get some pushback. Oh, you would just release everything. No, we wouldn't. We believe that information should be classified, when necessary.
But did Snowden release any damaging information in your judgment?
I think there might have been, because it was this uncontrolled release, because there wasn't sort of this oversight, if you will. Yeah, there could have been some damaging information that potentially got out. That's why we actually need rules in place so that we're not forced in the position of somebody who, thinks they're doing good, but maybe doesn't have the big picture, doesn't have all the answers, to release all of this information. I would much rather have kind of rules in place than, an Edward Snowden kind of deciding what should or should not be released.
But at the same time, right, I'm not pushing too much, but we wouldn't know about any of this if it weren't for Edward Snowden.
No, I think that's right. I mean, that's absolutely right. So, he opened all of our eyes to what was going on, and that was, very valuable and very, very important. That we at least saw this was going on. Now the next step is, what do we do? Now that we know this is going on, are we going to do anything about it or not? And I think, again, I think we're leaning towards not doing anything about it. I think that, under the guise of national security, again, not that we are diminishing that, but that people are afraid to kind of push back too hard.
But so you use the magic phrase I was going to ask you about, which is national security. That is most often where people run when they want to hide, correct?
Yeah, I mean,
they claim
national security. I think that's right. And again, that's why we need
classified or whatever. Right.
That's why we need checks and balances.
Which is a pretty broad term, isn't it?
I mean, we are concerned about excessive secrecy, about overclassification. Again, I don't want anybody to, I don't want to give information to our enemies that could put us at risk. Absolutely not. Under no circumstances. But I think what often happens, I don't think things should be classified because they're embarrassing to the United States government. And I think we get there.
Which often happens.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
So I think that's where we need the oversight. That's where we need people to take a hard look at what does and does not need to be classified. Because also, again, in this right to know, we have a right to know what we did wrong as well as what we did right, And I think that's
hearing this conversation, I'm reminded of Chelsea Manning and the trouble that Chelsea Manning got into because she shared these things that we were doing that were really abhorrent.
Mm-hmm.
And went to jail for it. I mean, she's out now,
right.
and that's good. But, like, went to solitary confinement, went to jail for it. And it's like, I would like to know that we as a country are doing the things that she shed light on.
Well, I think what's really important, too, and a lot of people don't understand this, it is a crime to release classified national security information. Sure. That is criminal. It is not a crime to, as our president likes to say, leak. You know, leaking who's having dinner with whom at the White House is not criminal.
Right.
As much as our president, I think, would like it to be criminal, at least when the information is about him. So there are laws in place, there are lines in place, and we can't blur those lines. But another concern, there was a massive torture report done by Congress, by Senator Dianne Feinstein, massive report about what we as the U.S. did in terms of torture. I don't think that entire report needs to be released. I don't, not right away, certainly. I'm sure there's classified information. But at the moment, none of it's being released. None of it is being released, even to members of Congress who were not on those committees to understand what was done. Even to the military, they can't read the report to see what worked and what didn't, and is this working, and is this a good idea or a bad idea? So again, it's not black and white. Everything is out in the open or nothing is out in the open. There are people in Congress, people in the agencies, people in the military who maybe need information that you and I don't need.
That report, as I recall, Senator Feinstein was pushing to get the report released, correct?
Yes, she was. And there was change in administration and a change in whether or not that report was going to be released.
And it was a congressional investigation.
It was.
Right?
Yes.
So paid for again by taxpayer dollars.
Well, yes, as most of this is.
Right.
And again, I'd like to see the table of contents. I'd like to know, an unclassified version of that report as a member of the public. And I would like the military to have the opportunity to learn from that report.
So who makes that decision not to release it?
So it's the executive branch right now. It's the agencies that have decided not to make that decision. And it's become what's called
so CIA?
The National Security Intelligence Agency community. Yeah.
That's 17 agencies.
Well,
is there anybody?
There probably is, and I apologize, I'm just not sure who kind of made that one decision.
I'm just curious, is it, whether it's the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence himself?
Right.
But this happened under the Obama administration, didn't it?
Well, the report happened under the Obama administration,
but the decision not to make it public.
The decision not to make it public happened. Happened under the Trump administration. There was actually a shift in policy that would keep it all confidential.
Right. I've read on your site about the FBI's use of this term black identity extremists. Yeah, what is that?
That is,
Isn't that what J. Edgar Hoover called Martin Luther King Jr.?
I don't know if those were the exact words that Hoover used, but that's kind of reminiscent, and that's what we're worried about with this term being used.
Where did this term come from?
It's a term being used by the FBI, again, to, we believe, monitor and surveil people, organizations. We think the problem is that they're lumping together, peaceful protesters who are objecting to racial discrimination by law enforcement with potential, I don't know who, people who really may be violent. But again, I'm hesitating a little bit because I don't really know who's lumped under this terminology because it's not transparent.
And are they using it?
We think they are using it, yes, exactly, to monitor, again, groups who have been protesting or opposing racist practices in law enforcement. But again, does that lump in the three of us who are sitting here because we've been to a protest, a Black Lives Matter protest, for example? We don't know. So what we're looking for, once again, is this transparency. Well, why are you using this, this label? And who falls under this label? And if I happen to be, or you happen to be, or my organization is part of, falls under this label, am I being surveilled? Am I being monitored? And if so, how do I defend against that? How do I say, no, I am not planning violence. I am actually just exercising my First Amendment rights to peaceful protest.
This is where it seems to me it's a direct application of this is neither left nor right. This is across the board concern about surveillance, particularly of activist organizations. So I'm thinking of something like Occupy, right? Mm-hmm. Which had a powerful message, either Wall Street or here on Freedom Plaza in Washington, D.C., or around the country, these Occupy protests. But some people, I'm sure, including probably the FBI, saw them as a potential threat.
Right. Right.
And so there were probably people infiltrating these groups or going to these rallies.
Right.
Yeah, and writing up reports.
I think that's right. And again, I think there needs to be some accountability. You know, if that is actually happening, why is it happening? Who is it happening to? And
why are
is
they
it
there?
necessary? Is it actually keeping us safer?
No.
And we don't know. Well, we don't know. And we need the answers to that.
There was a time when the FBI had files on everybody, right? Do they still?
I'm sure they have some files. Yes, I'm no doubt about it.
Well, it's so funny hearing you talk about this, because I think that there have been people who have been a little painted as being a little paranoid about what the government is capable of doing, but I'm not so skeptical anymore. I think the government is actually looking at us more and more and more. When you look at what the NSA did, and looking into your computers and your cameras and your smartphones and all this crap.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
Sure.
But I just think that we have checks and balances for a reason. And, if the FBI is doing one thing, Congress should know about it and be able to question it.
And we should know about it.
And we should know about it.
Right. Absolutely. You are fighting for all of us. This is great. It is so important. Thanks so much for coming in and telling us about it. Open, I know you're not a new organization, but new to me, so I'm just glad to know you're there.
And I am glad to be here and glad to have the opportunity. Thank you so much.
It's Open the Government, openthegovernment.org. Check it out, lend your support, and fight the good fight for transparency and total openness. We deserve to know what our government is up to.